Rich nations do not remain wealthy by accident. Their prosperity is not the result of luck, geography alone, or a single moment of success. It is the outcome of long historical processes, carefully designed systems, and structures that continuously protect and multiply wealth. While many countries struggle to escape poverty, rich nations operate in a way that makes wealth self-reinforcing. Understanding why rich nations stay rich reveals how power, money, and institutions quietly work together over generations. One of the most important reasons rich nations remain rich is that they built strong institutions early. Stable governments, enforceable laws, property rights, and reliable financial systems created trust. When people trust that contracts will be honored and assets protected, investment flows naturally. Businesses are willing to take risks, banks lend confidently, and innovation thrives. Poor nations often lack this stability, not because their people are less capable, but because their institutions were weakened by colonialism, conflict, or corruption. History plays a decisive role. Many rich nations accumulated wealth during eras of empire, trade expansion, and industrialization. They extracted resources, labor, and wealth from other regions and reinvested those gains into infrastructure, education, and industry at home. This created a powerful starting advantage. Once wealth was accumulated, it was protected, compounded, and passed forward. Poorer nations, in contrast, often began their modern history in debt, dependency, and structural disadvantage. Another key factor is control over money and finance. Rich nations usually issue strong, trusted currencies. Their money is accepted globally, used in trade, and held as reserves. This gives them extraordinary power. They can borrow cheaply, run deficits without immediate crisis, and stabilize their economies during downturns. When crises hit, rich nations print money, inject stimulus, and protect key institutions. Poor nations rarely have this option. Printing money often leads to inflation or collapse because their currencies lack global trust. Education and human capital also explain long-term wealth. Rich nations invest heavily in education, research, and skills. This creates a workforce capable of producing high-value goods and services rather than raw materials. Technology, innovation, and intellectual property generate profits far beyond traditional industries. Patents, brands, and data become new forms of wealth. Poor nations are often trapped in low-value production, exporting cheap labor and raw resources while importing expensive finished products. Trade rules favor those who already dominate markets. Rich nations help design the global trading system. They promote free trade when it benefits them and protect domestic industries when it does not. Subsidies, tariffs, standards, and regulations often disadvantage poorer competitors. Even when markets appear open, hidden barriers remain. This allows rich nations to maintain control over global supply chains and profit distribution. Political influence reinforces economic strength. Wealth gives rich nations greater influence in international institutions, global negotiations, and crisis management. They shape rules, standards, and policies that align with their interests. When problems arise, they receive support. When poor nations face crises, they are often offered loans with conditions that limit sovereignty and growth. This imbalance keeps power concentrated. Technology deepens the gap. Rich nations lead in artificial intelligence, finance, energy, and digital infrastructure. These technologies increase productivity while reducing dependence on manual labor. Control of technology also means control of data, platforms, and future industries. Nations that fall behind technologically struggle to catch up, no matter how hard they work. Culture and mindset also matter. Rich nations often promote long-term planning, institutional continuity, and systemic thinking. Policies are designed to survive political cycles. Wealth is managed strategically, not emotionally. In many poor nations, short-term survival dominates decision-making, not because of ignorance, but because instability leaves no space for long-term vision. Crises further expose the divide. When global crises occur, rich nations protect themselves first. They rescue banks, stabilize markets, and support industries. Poor nations absorb shocks without safety nets. Over time, each crisis widens the gap. Wealth flows upward and inward, reinforcing existing power structures. Most importantly, rich nations understand that wealth is not just money. It is control. Control over finance, technology, trade, narratives, and institutions. As long as these controls remain intact, wealth reproduces itself. Rich nations stay rich because the system was built that way. This does not mean the system is permanent or fair. History shows that power shifts. New nations rise. Old empires fall. But change requires more than effort. It requires restructuring systems, not just improving performance within them. Understanding why rich nations stay rich is not about blaming or admiring them. It is about seeing the world clearly. Because only by understanding how wealth is protected can nations and individuals begin to imagine a different future.